Right now, a legal argument championed by Donald Trump is taking aim at one of the most foundational ideas in American law: birthright citizenship. At the center of it all is the 14th Amendment, long understood to mean that if you're born on U.S. soil, you're a U.S. citizen. Trump argues that the 14th Amendment's clause, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, does not apply to individuals in the country illegally, contending that committing a misdemeanor, that being illegal entry to the country as defined by U.S. Code, negates the required allegiance to the United States. This is actually something that was set into motion day one of Trump's presidency with Executive Order 14160. It's only now that the Supreme Court is stepping in to interpret this in the coming months. And if they agree with that challenge to the 14th Amendment, what actually happens next? How would this actually be enforced across America? Could states resist? And can they take citizenship away from those who've already gained it? We're going to answer all of this and more, looking specifically at the U.S. Constitution. Okay, so if the Supreme Court agrees with Trump, what's the most likely outcome? Well, nothing's going to change overnight for people already born. So if you were born in the US recently and both your parents weren't citizens, you'll still be a citizen. We'll touch on why this can't be changed constitutionally in a minute. Instead, the ruling would apply going forward only. That means babies born in the US after the change takes place would no longer automatically be citizens. Citizenship would depend only on the legal status of their parents. So instead of born here equals citizen, it becomes born here plus qualifying parent equals citizen. In fact, it could even be reduced to just qualifying parent equals citizen. Now, how would the government actually enforce it? This is where things get complicated. How do we actually do this? There's no single switch to flip. Enforcement would happen across multiple systems. First, hospitals would need to overhaul their entire process. Now, currently, hospitals do not verify immigration status. Under a new system, they might be required to do new things. We'll call this first option Option A, in which enforcement would require hospitals to request documentation like passports or visas or green cards from the parents, record the legal status at the time of birth, and then submit that data to state vital records offices. This obviously would be a major operational and legal change. It would also require hospitals to give training on immigration document types to their staff, protocols for incomplete or missing documentation, and guidance on what to do if parents just refuse to provide the information. All of this introduces risk. Risk of mistakes or inconsistent application, even potential liability concerns. There's also going to be the rogue hospital that's going to grant U.S. citizenship for the right price to newborns. The much simpler way to tackle this, we'll call this Option B, would be to stop having a birth certificate act as proof of citizenship. Then hospitals could still do their thing and not be involved in the finer process of cross-examining new parents. If I had to run the show, that would be my solution. Now, secondly, federal agencies would need to change as well. Groups like the U.S. Department of State and the Social Security Administration would likely require proof of parents' legal status before issuing a passport or a Social Security number. As a reminder, to get a passport now, you typically show your U.S. birth certificate, and that's proof enough of your citizenship. No proof of parents' legal status is actually required. As far as Social Security numbers go, for newborns currently, hospitals often will help the parents to apply automatically. The birth certificate is used to establish the child's eligibility. Again, no immigration status check on the actual parents. With the birth certificate meaning less, these processes would have to change. Next up is Congress. They'd have to step in and define which parents qualify and how, what documents will be required, and what happens in edge cases. And in the short term, you can expect lawsuits. Endless lawsuits as far as the eye can see. Now, could states push back or defy this? Here's where things could get messy. I find myself saying this with every news section we get to in this video, but things will get messy. Under the Supremacy Clause, which states that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, federal law, and especially Supreme Court rulings, are supposed to be the final word. So states can't just ignore the ruling outright. But that doesn't mean they won't resist. Here are a few ways states could push back if they disagree with this. First, states could file their own lawsuits, arguing that the ruling is being misapplied and that federal agencies are overreaching. These lawsuits can delay enforcement for years. We've already seen this play out. States like Illinois, California, and New Jersey have sued the federal government over immigration enforcement, arguing federal agencies went too far. In some cases, courts have even sided with the states, blocking or limiting those policies. Another way states could resist would be administrative resistance. Remember, states control birth certificates. So some states might continue issuing them without verifying the parental status or refuse to collect immigration information. This would create a gap between state records and federal recognition of citizenship. This is all, of course, assuming whoever's in charge of enforcement went with option A. Bad choice. Now, states can't make someone a U.S. citizen, but they do control many of the rights and services people rely on day to day. So even without federal recognition, states could still provide access to public education, driver's licenses, and state benefits, all without proof of citizenship. And again, we've already seen similar approaches in immigration policy conflicts. Ultimately, though, conflict between states and the federal government would likely head right back to the courts, possibly even returning to the Supreme Court of the United States again. So while states probably couldn't overturn the ruling, they could absolutely shape how chaotic or how slow the rollout becomes. Again, expect lawsuits. Endless lawsuits as far as the eye can see. Here's the real kick in the pants. The US is actually in the minority when it comes to birth citizenship. Most countries do not grant automatic citizenship just for being born there. Instead, they use a system based on parents called jus sanguinis, or right of blood. Countries like Germany, Japan, the United Kingdom, they all require at least one parent to be a citizen or legal resident. In fact, over the last 50 years, several countries have rolled back their birthright citizenship, just like the United States is contemplating now. The UK ended unrestricted birthright citizenship in 1983, Ireland restricted theirs after a national vote, and Australia moved to a parent-based system. Today, most countries that do offer automatic birthright citizenship are in the Americas, including the US, but for how long? Canada, and much of Latin America. So if the US changed its policy, it wouldn't be creating a new way to restrict citizenship. It would actually be joining most of the world. Up next, we will join the rest of the world with the metric system. Nah, I'm just kidding. God bless US customary units. Everyone knows God loves America more, and that love is measured in feet. So, to sum up, globally, unrestricted birthright citizenship is the exception, not the rule. Okay, so if this change happens, and your baby is born the day this goes into effect, what's going to happen? Well, your kid doesn't just become a stateless person. Think Tom Hanks in The Terminal, which, shameless plug, I have a video on renouncing citizenship and becoming a citizen of nowhere, which you can click on the screen or in the video description after. Anyways, instead, the child will receive a birth certificate, which is just going to be a piece of paper at this point, and their legal status will be tied to their parents. That could mean a dependent visa, a temporary legal status, or permanent residency if the parents already have it. So think of it less like losing something and more like shifting to a different system. All right, this is where things get really serious. Could the government go back and strip citizenship from people already born here? In reality, that's extremely unlikely for a number of reasons. Constitutional protections like the Fifth Amendment, the Supreme Court precedents like Afrayim versus Rusk, and the sheer scale, the millions of people affected, all signs that point to no. Let's start with the Fifth Amendment. Courts treat citizenship as one of the most protected statuses you can have. That citizenship equals a fundamental liberty interest which means the government must provide full due process before taking it away. This comes from the wording of the Fifth Amendment: no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And due process isn't abstract. It requires individual notice, individual hearings, evidence presented, and the opportunity to defend yourself. Now scale all of this to millions of people. You're not just passing a law, you're creating one of the largest legal proceedings in human history. Courts are going to ask themselves, can this actually be done fairly? If the system can't deliver real due process, then courts are going to block it outright. There's also controlling precedent in the Supreme Court case about citizenship, which is called Afrayim versus Rusk. And again, this channel has talked about it multiple times in citizenship-related topics. It's a huge landmark Supreme Court case. It establishes that citizenship, once granted, is constitutionally protected. The government cannot involuntarily take it away. This all stems from the 14th Amendment, which, may I remind you, could be interpreted differently in the very near future. Now, what about retroactively taking away citizenship? Here's what a retroactive law would basically say in this instance. What we previously recognized as valid citizenship now isn't. That creates a direct conflict with the Supreme Court case Afrayim because it treats citizenship as revocable by statute, and the court has already said it's not. Now, there are limited denaturalization cases today which Afrayim does not protect, but only for things like fraud during the naturalization process. If you're lying through your teeth during the naturalization process and you gain citizenship this way, and they find out, then Afrayim versus Rusk will not protect you. The burden of proof is extremely high, and the process is very individualized. A broad retroactive rule is a totally different category and much weaker legally. Even outside citizenship, courts are skeptical of retroactive laws. There's a general principle. People are entitled to rely on the law as it existed when they acted. Timeline stuff is tricky, but retroactive citizenship changes would undo decades of settled legal status and potentially render people stateless, which is something nobody wants to be. It would also disrupt property, voting, and legal rights. Courts often interpret laws to avoid retroactivity, unless Congress is unmistakably clear, and even then, constitutional limits will still apply. Guys, even criminals are protected by retroactivity in changes of criminal law, as mentioned in the Constitution. These are known as ex post facto laws. It does not apply in this instance with citizenship, since no crimes are being committed here. So, if the Supreme Court reinterprets the 14th Amendment, it wouldn't just be a legal shift. It would be a fundamental change in how America defines who belongs. Not overnight, not retroactively, but going forward. It could redefine citizenship for generations to come. And the real question isn't just, can it happen? It's whether the country is ready for what comes after. Okay, that's it for now. Thanks so much for sticking to the end of my video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. We'll make more videos soon.